I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio.
Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. Today, we're talking about how to add special details to your garments that make them feel truly extraordinary. So we'll cover where to find inspiration for special details, techniques you can try regardless of your skill level, how to approach learning new embellishment methods, and ways to make your garments feel personal and meaningful. All right, Haley, so what is a special detail or technique on something that you've made that makes you feel particularly proud?
Ooh, I have lots of things that I've made that make me feel proud, but you know what always instills a lot of pride is a welt pocket.
Yeah.
Every time I nail a welt pocket, I feel like a superstar. And I'm like a big fan of a practical detail.
Mm-hmm.
And a welt pocket, it's a pocket.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like strikes that balance between being practical and decorative as well.
Yeah, and they look so lovely and tailored.
Mm-hmm. What about you?
The one that comes to mind, so I'm wearing this dress that I just finished, and it's a bias cut dress. And when I went to go, it was supposed to be a long dress. It's a vintage pattern. It was supposed to be it's actually a nightgown, and I shortened it. I wanted to make a mini dress out of it, and I didn't have anybody around to help me with the hem measuring. So I kind of winged it, and it turned out way too short. So I added this really cute ruffle on the bottom just to add like another inch. And it's still short, but it's not as short as it was. And that makes me feel proud because it was improvising and coming up with a solution to a problem, and it looks really cute.
I feel like sometimes those improvised details are some of the best ones.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's mine right now. So if you have a question for us that we can use as an icebreaker for a future episode, you can leave it in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and we'll answer it in a future episode. All right. So I have been thinking a lot lately about what makes certain garments in my closet feel extra special. So those kinds of pieces that I just reach for again and again, not just because they're practical, but because wearing them just brings me joy. And I've realized that it's often those little thoughtful details that transform a really simple garment into something that's extraordinary. Like that hand-stitched embroidery on a collar, or perfectly matched pattern at the seams, or that unexpected pop of color inside a pocket. Those little small touches that make such a big difference in how we feel about our clothes. And recently I decided to add smocking to my Madu top that I'm making, which was definitely outside my comfort zone. It's not something I've ever done before, but I'm so excited about making it, and I'm really enjoying the process so much, both the detail but also the learning that comes from it. And I think the thing is that special details, they don't have to be complicated or time-consuming. I think even small touches can really elevate a garment from something that you made to something that you really treasure. And I also think there's something really satisfying about slowing down sometimes and just putting that extra care into a project. We're often so focused on finishing things quickly, but there's a lot of joy to be found in those slow, more meditative techniques. So, Haley, do you have a special go-to detail that you really love to add to your garments besides welt pockets?
I think that my most used one is probably creative top stitching. I like to, when it's included in the pattern or whether it's not, I like to think of ways that I can make it feel a little bit more elevated. Some of the things that I like to do are use contrasting thread or even a tonal thread. I just finished a pair of pants that are this kind of denim-y blue color, and I did a thread that was just a couple shades darker.
Mm-hmm.
And then I added additional bar tacks, and it just gave it a little bit more texture, so it felt more intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I like about top stitching is you can kind of improvise it, like we were talking about with the ruffle. When your garment's feeling a little bland,
Mm-hmm.
it's a real quick way to add a little something extra.
Yeah, I like that. I just finished a pair of Chelsea jeans recently, and I think the top stitching is that's the most fun part of making pants or jeans, I think, things you can add. Sienna has this pair of denim pants that has red top stitching, and I just think they're so cute.
I know which ones you're talking about. She was also wearing a shirt at the photo shoot on Friday with great top stitching. And when I was working on these pants this weekend, I was like, you know what it needs? Top stitching.
That's a really good one because it goes on so many things and it can be functional too.
And it's overlooked. I think that sometimes we treat it as just like one more step that we're kind of getting through, but I find it like a nice moment to pause and be like, well, what do I really want to do with this top stitching?
Yeah, yeah. That's a good one. I think those are all good. And I like the idea of bar tacks too. I think I was looking at my Bernina stitch chart that has all the different decorative stitches as well as functional stitches because I was trying to learn how to do machine mending with my machine. And I was looking at all the different bar tacks and shape tacks that they have, and I want to try more of those because I think they're just so cute and they're easy to do if you have them on your machine.
Yeah, totally. My machine's like a little more old fashioned, so I have to do it manually, but I have played around on some of the Berninas with the fancy bar tacks, and they're super fun.
Yeah, it is really fun. And I have my baker top that I made. I think I put this in the video. I discovered that if you use fray check over a chalk or, a mark with your water soluble marker.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
So I have this little blue spot on the back of my top. It's like a cream colored top. And so this blue dot right on the back. So I was thinking I could do it's right at the end of a slit. So I thought I could just put a cool like triangular tack on there and it would be really cute and cover it up. Yeah.
What about you? What's your special go-to detail?
I love insertions of all kinds, like a lace insertion or some kind of really cool trim that you can insert between seams. I think it just adds such a special little heirloom detail and it's very easy to do. And I think it's very creative. You can find really fun ways to play with it and sort of emphasize seams that way. So I really like that on a top or a dress.
I think that trims are the most underutilized thing in home sewing.
Yeah.
Outside of bias tape, I feel like a lot of times I don't see it on a lot of garments made by home sewers. And that's one of the reasons why I was really excited to create the bloom blouse because it gives people like an easy entry point to playing with some trims.
Yeah, absolutely. I just love that. And it's something you can, in the bloom blouse, which has a yoke and then it has a place for you to insert trim between the yoke and the rest of the blouse. And I love that, but you can also just add it to almost anything. So it's one of my favorites for sure. And I love lace also.
Yeah, you are a lace girl.
Yeah, definitely.
When you're planning a project, at what point do you decide to add a special detail? Is it something that you plan from the beginning or does inspiration sometimes kind of strike halfway through?
Usually I plan it from the beginning. With this dress with the ruffle that I just mentioned, definitely not planned. But usually I really enjoy that process of planning out the details and researching techniques and kind of figuring out, the design part of it, I think is often overlooked and when people are rushing to get to the project and get it finished. And I think the design process is really the most fun out of everything with sewing, picking out the fabric, picking out the trims, deciding what details to add. So that's what I really like. And then, learning about it. So that's how I like to approach it usually. What about you?
Yeah, most of the time, I try to brainstorm ideas for special details while I'm in the design process. And I'm, as you know, and our listeners know, we're both really big on mood boards. And I like to include details in those mood boards as well. But I also like to treat part of the design process for me is just like really iterative. And I treat all of my projects like, an experiment. That's a mindset that I try to take so that my perfectionistic tendencies don't take hold. And sometimes like improvising halfway through is the best way to like salvage something. And sometimes you don't kind of see it in your mind's eye until the garment starts coming together and you can see potential where you didn't see it before. So I'm like a little bit more free flowing with it, I guess.
That's fun too.
I feel like there's something really personal about adding these kinds of details to our clothing. Have you found that adding special touches makes you less likely to participate in fast fashion or shopping for clothes rather than just making them?
I think in a way, yes, because I was just talking about this with my sister the other day that sewing helps you to spend less because you see something and you think, oh, I could make that. It would be fun to make that, or I could learn how to make that. And even if you never do make it, you've kind of foregone the shopping
Yeah.
already. That happens to me all the time. And she was saying that happens to her. So in that way, I think sometimes I'll see a really cool detail in a piece of clothing and think, oh, that's so neat. And then I'll think about how I could do it or how I could learn or, what I could try that's similar. And it'll inspire me rather than causing me to want to own that thing, that particular thing.
Yeah.
So it definitely helps in that way. Do you have that experience too?
Yeah, I think that it's like sewing has raised my standards of what I find acceptable in a garment. And
Mhm.
also, I play the game with myself of like, how would I make it?
Yeah.
And I can always think of the ways in which I would improve upon a ready to wear item. And if I don't feel that way about it, then it's likely out of my budget anyway. So that kind of helps. But yeah, I find that my standards are just higher. So I'm less likely to cave and buy something.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is the difference between a special detail that feels really timeless versus something that might feel a little bit dated after a period of time?
Oh, that's a good question. For me, I'm really, as you know, I'm really drawn to vintage styles and vintage things or things that are
Hmm.
inspired by, further in the past.
Yeah.
So I think if something has been around for a long time, even if it is particularly in style or trendy right now, it'll probably come back.
Yeah.
So I feel like because fashion is so cyclical, if you like something and it is inspired by vintage styles that have gone in and out of fashion for decades, then it's timeless. It'll probably, cycle in and out, but if you love it, then it'll feel timeless to you.
Yeah.
Whereas something maybe that is, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like things that have gone in and out of fashion. Like, for some reason, what comes to mind is I remember when I was in high school in the 90s, like, there were these shoes, these like sneakers that were like shiny, like patent leather sneakers. Do you
Okay.
remember these? I don't like, they were Converse One Stars and things like that, but they were like shiny.
I do remember this.
I don't know
Uh-huh.
why this comes to mind, but like things that maybe are just more novelty like that are the things that I think maybe go past their prime pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think that that kind of gets at like what I was thinking in terms of the difference between these like timeless and trendy is that the details oftentimes are not the things that go out of style.
Hmm.
It's, I think that fabrics,
Yeah.
silhouettes, those are things that tend to be, you can clock where it's from like a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But like a beautiful like lace insertion, I can think of 90s looking garments that had them. I can think of garments from the 30s that had them. I can kind of picture it in all of these different contexts.
Yeah.
So I feel like the details are like less aging of a garment in a way. I don't
Hmm.
know. I'm sure I can think of details that would certainly wouldn't fit that. But also to me, when I'm deciding on something, whether it's like a detail or a garment, and I'm worried it's going to be maybe look too costumey as I think about how I'm going to wear it.
Yeah.
So I think like blouses are a really safe place to get like a experiment with some of those more vintage or antique details because you can wear it with jeans. You could wear like a workwear jacket over it and style it so that it feels more modern.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely true. Well, let's get into our tips and share some tips that might help people if you are feeling inspired to add more details to your garments. So, the first one is to start with your inspiration. So, I mentioned that I like the planning process, I like the design process. And when I'm planning to add a special detail to a garment, I always start by collecting inspiration. So, that really helps me to refine my ideas and to, I think, most importantly, visualize the final result and what that's going to look like in my particular fabric, my particular style that I'm making. So, for my smocked Madu top that I'm making, for example, I created a Pinterest board that included vintage blouses that had traditional smocking on them, and then some more modern interpretations and different color combinations just to kind of see what it might look like and help me to visualize and put all these details together, maybe different elements from the past and more modern styles, different colors, and kind of visualize what mine might look like and come up with a few different ideas. I really do find it helpful to include both vintage and contemporary references to help me to strike a balance between things that are timeless and things that feel a little bit more modern. And that just kind of opens my horizons and helps me to kind of expand my vision of what I'm creating so it's not rooted in any one particular time or era, but can kind of be filtered through my own lens and my own sensibilities. Looking at how a technique has evolved over time can also be really interesting because sometimes an old school approach speaks to you more than the latest trend, and sometimes it's vice versa. So I think it's helpful to look at that from kind of that entire history of whatever the detail is. I also find it helpful, just as a tip, to be really specific with your inspiration. So rather than just gathering general ideas for embellished tops, for example, you could focus narrowly on the particular technique that you're considering. So one way I do this, I do have a Pinterest board that's just details. It's just like a whole bunch of different details that I come across, and I have a place to save them. But then when I'm actually planning a project, I'll narrow it down and think about what that specific detail is. And I'll kind of look through all of that inspiration to find things that are within that specific technique. And I find that really, really helpful. So it's kind of like a broad inspiration and then a more narrow inspiration for a particular project. Do you have a particular favorite place to look for inspiration, Haley?
I mean, the obvious is Pinterest, and that's the home where I put all of my inspiration. But I also really like looking on Etsy or eBay at different vintage sellers
Hmm.
because a lot of times, like vintage clothing just has a lot more of these kinds of like small details and techniques that we can lift and interpret
Hmm.
for ourselves. Also, I like looking at like high-end ready to wear and also like fashion week, looking at the street style and also the runway shows just to get some inspiration from there as well. I find that it's like you, I like to blend the modern and vintage together. I think that I find sometimes that when I hone in on one more than the other, that the outcome can sometimes be more one-dimensional and less specific to my taste.
Yeah, definitely. I like all those sources for inspiration. I also think museum websites can be a really
Mhm.
great place to look. There's often really vast collections, like at the Met. We mentioned this in a recent episode,
Mhm.
but I think that's a great place to look. And I think books too. I was just looking through. I have a book called Vintage Details. It's like a coffee table book of vintage details from clothing, and it's really just fun to page through. Sit with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and page through it and
Mhm.
get ideas that you might not have thought about. Because I think a lot of clothes there's a lot of stuff from the 60s in that book, and there's just so many really cool, interesting details that you could crib and add to a completely different style
Yeah.
and create something really interesting. So I think that's really fun too.
Okay, so for our next step, you need to find all of the right resources to make your garment dreams a reality. So once you have a clear vision, you need to learn how to execute the technique, especially if it's a new to you technique. Don't limit yourself to just one type of resource. Videos can help you understand the movements that are involved, but books a lot of times provide a lot more precise information and detail about the technique. So definitely check out books, and as much as I love YouTube, it's not always like a direct substitute for just a good old book. Online communities can also show you how others have adapted this technique to modern garments. And even though I'm not a costumer, I found historical costuming forums to be super helpful. They often preserve the technique that mainstream sewing resources have kind of simplified over time to make it easier for everyday sewers. And also, local classes can be amazing too. There's nothing quite like having someone right there to help guide your hands through a new technique. As a former sewing teacher, I highly recommend going and supporting your local fabric shop and taking some classes with them. Sari, so what's your process for learning a new technique?
I like to use a combination of things. I like YouTube videos if I'm kind of looking for either something really, really specific that I need to visualize and I need to see in action, or I just want kind of an introduction to a technique before I dive in. And then for actually learning the technique, that's really helpful, but I also really like to have a book because they often go into more detail, and I like having photos that I can reference very easily. So for the smocking project that I'm doing, I bought a book that I mentioned on YouTube in the YouTube video, and I'm going to do another video once the project is complete, but the book is called Rocking Smocking. It's a modern book, and it's great. It walks you through step by step everything you need to know about smocking. So I find that to be really, really helpful to have that as a reference.
Yeah, I think books can be great because I don't know, personally, sometimes when I'm using a YouTube video as a reference, it can be super annoying when you have to like rewind it 5 times because you need to like see that last detail again and again for the repetition. And especially for something like smocking where you want to be like maybe sitting in a cozy chair, like having your book open on your side table might be a little more appealing.
Yeah. But sometimes it is really helpful to see things in action.
Yeah, you have to.
The next step is to make a supply list and gather up your materials. So after researching, make a detailed list of everything that you're going to need. And what this does is it prevents those frustrating mid-project supply runs, but I also find that it really helps overcome the procrastination that often comes with trying something new. So for my smocked madu, for example, I needed specific embroidery floss, I needed hand sewing needles, a water-soluble fabric marker, a little embroidery hoop, and then I needed some transfer paper. And I gathered up all that stuff before I started because I knew that if I didn't have it all, it would just be an excuse not to start working on it and to work on something that was a little bit more fully formed in my mind. So another thing you can do is check if there are kits available that include everything you need for a specific technique. They're often worth having that kind of slightly higher price just for the convenience. I like to do that when I'm trying something that's completely new to me. I recently bought a book on punch needle. I want to learn how to do punch needle. And there are some really cute kits out there that can help you just get started and just have everything you need all in one place. So I'm thinking about getting one of those just to try it out. And I've also found kits for smocking, for sashiko embroidery, trapunto quilting. They're great ways to try something new without investing a lot in individual supplies.
I love that tip. All right. Our next tip is to make a quick sample. Before touching your actual project, making a small sample using scrap fabric similar to your final material or even your final material can be so helpful. This allows you to practice the technique without all of the pressure of being perfect and test how the fabric behaves as well and experiment also with the colors and adjust your stitch tension. There's so many things that potential issues you can intercept if you just make a sample. Even a little 6x6 square can tell you so much about how a technique will work on your chosen fabric. I've had many situations where what works beautifully on linen needs a complete adjustment for cotton lawn or even silk. And sampling is also a great way to build confidence before committing to your good fabric. So this is a step that I make sure to, and I've learned to never skip because I have in the past and, lessons learned. Do you ever skip the sample step?
I'm tempted to sometimes. Like on this smocking project, I was a little concerned about not having enough fabric. And so I was like, well, should I cut a piece of this fabric just to do a sample when I'm not sure if I have enough? So what I did is I cut out the whole project. Since it's a surface detail, I cut out the whole project. Then I used the scraps to do the sampling. And that way I made sure that I had enough fabric because, the actual smocking wasn't going to affect the cutting of the rest of the pattern. So that's a good tip if you're concerned about using fabric. But I do think that if you're doing something new, just trying a little sample of it, it really doesn't take that much time, and it's probably going to save you time in the long run and just increase your confidence.
Yeah, even when I'm not doing a particularly special detail, I always keep some of my fabric scraps by my machine to test stitch length and tension and look at the top stitching color and context of the fabric. It's just a good practice to keep.
Yes. And also, I was just thinking about this the other day. So whenever I sew a project, there's inevitably at some part where I get a thread jam or a thread nest or my needle gets bent somehow or something happens. And then I have to take everything out, rethread the machine. And then I don't want to go right back to stitching on my garment because I don't know if I fixed the problem yet. And so I always have some scraps next to me just to test out the stitching once I fix a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good thing to do too. The next tip is to just embrace imperfection. This is something that I wish somebody had told me earlier in my sewing journey, that your first attempt at a technique probably won't be perfect and that that's perfectly okay. So when I know I'm talking a lot about this Madu top, but it's on my mind because I'm making it right now. But when I started it, my first few rows had uneven tension and a little bit wobbly lines. And as I continued, my stitches became more even and I developed kind of a rhythm. Rather than ripping out those first rows, I just left them as a reminder of the learning process instead of trying to make everything perfect. I think handmade details aren't really meant to look machine perfect, and sometimes their slight irregularities are what really make them special and make them uniquely yours. So this kind of wabi-sabi approach of finding beauty in imperfection has really transformed how I approach these special details. How do you feel about imperfections in your sewing, Haley?
Depends.
Yeah, me too. It depends. It depends.
For me, it depends on the visibility of it.
Yes.
I'm a really anti-imperfections that are very close to my face or the center of my body. But I try not to get too caught up on them. I think have struck a good balance over the years of sometimes a question that I ask myself is like, would this be able to hang in a store the way it is? Because if you look at garments that are hanging up in a store closely, you will see that there are plenty of imperfections on them. And I think that gives me like a little bit of that like freedom that like even when it's coming like from a factory line by people who sew all day, every day as they're, living, it's not going to be perfect. And that's, that's fine. And yeah, but I am a little bit of a perfectionist. That's okay.
I think it also depends on if it's a hand-stitched type of detail versus, something like a welt pocket you might want to look really tailored and really beautiful and perfect. And something like hand embroidery or, something that's meant to look handmade, I think might be a little bit different.
Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, like with like contrast top stitching, like I do care. But yeah, with like a hand embroidered detail, I think that the imperfections are part of the charm. All right. Our next tip is to give yourself plenty of time. Adding special details time is your friend. So set aside dedicated time to work without rushing. This can be so crucial. Try breaking the project up into weeks or weekends, 1 week or weekend for practicing and preparing, another for executing the special technique, and then another for completing the garment. This relaxed timeline really allows you to work when you're feeling fresh and creative and take breaks when you need it, because you need to step back and evaluate your progress sometimes, and just barreling through isn't your friend when you're trying to slow down and create these special details. Approaching these special techniques as slow sewing rather than tasks to be completed really changes the entire experience. I like to save detail-oriented projects for evenings when I can sit somewhere comfortable, away from my sewing machine, maybe with a good podcast or an audiobook, and just really like enjoy that time. That way, hand stitching becomes less of a task and more of a treat, almost like a meditation. Sarai, what's your favorite environment for working on detailed hand techniques?
I think it depends. I have my sewing shed in my backyard, and I love going there. It's just so cozy, and it's away from everything, and there's trees all around me, and it's just beautiful and very peaceful. So I really like to sit out there, listen to music, and do some stitching. But sometimes it's nice. It depends on the time of year too. Maybe to sit by the fire and with my dogs and cats and
Yeah.
Well, hopefully the cats aren't too close if I'm hand stitching because they are troublemakers. But yeah, it depends. But I like to be comfortable, I would say. What about you?
Yeah, I like it to be quiet. That's what's most important to me. Other than like music or a podcast or audiobook, I don't want children's, underfoot.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's nothing. I have a cozy chair in my living room that I like to sit down and do that kind of stuff. I have like a little side table right by me for my beverage. It's kind of like my happy spot. and it's right by the fireplace. So yeah, that's my preferred spot.
Our next tip is to balance challenging projects with quick wins. So after completing a project with time-intensive details, I really like to just immediately sew something simple that I can finish quickly. And I think that pattern of alternating between complex, detail-oriented projects and then simpler, instant gratification makes has become my secret weapon for really maintaining sewing momentum. The quick project provides the sense of accomplishment. It's a palate cleanser for just my creative energy, and it's a chance to use skills that you're already confident in as well. I find this especially helpful when I'm learning new techniques because it reminds me that I do know how to sew, even if the new skill feels challenging. So after my smocked Modu top, I'm planning to make a simple Everly skirt that I can finish in a single afternoon. It's just a very simple bias cut skirt with a zipper. I've got it cut out, ready to go so that I have something to sew after I'm done with this bigger project. Do you have any favorite palette cleansers, Haley?
Usually in my sewing queue, I have a handful of easy. I try to keep one or two easy, one-day projects in there just for that purpose. But if ever I'm out of easy projects, I always love doing a little home deck project or a tote bag, like a little table runner or some napkins or even a little bit of mending just to have a quick win.
Yeah.
All right. And next, we want to give you some ideas for special details to try. If you're looking to add special touches, there's so many options beyond smocking, even though we love smocking, our rockin' smockin'. Hand embroidery is one great one you can try. You can do some French knots along a collar edge, a small monogram on a pocket, or even a delicate running stitch along a hem can be beautiful. Unique closures. You can swap standard buttons for vintage finds. I love looking at vintage buttons on Etsy. I actually went down quite the rabbit hole of this last week. Hand-covered buttons in a contrasting fabric or even self-fabric can be a beautiful touch as well, or even toggle closures instead of a button. Contrasting facings or linings. I like to use unexpected fabrics for parts only you can see, a Liberty printed pocket bag, a bright silk jacket lining, or even a contrasting seam binding. Decorative top stitching, which is one of my favorites, adds visual interest with contrasting thread colors, decorative patterns, or even hand top stitching. And then surfaced elements are really fun to experiment with. You can use pin tucks on a blouse front, honeycomb smocking on cuffs, or even fabric origami elements just to give a little extra texture to your project. Sarah, do you have a favorite special detail?
I like all the ones you mentioned. We just did a video on pin tucks that came out. By the time you're listening to this, it was probably a month ago or so, but it is really inspiring me to play with pin tucks a lot more. So I'm really excited about that. I also love vintage buttons. The dress that I'm wearing that I talked about, the too short one that I mentioned earlier, has vintage buttons, these vintage big glass buttons that I got at a antique flea market last year with my sister, and they're just so pretty. I just love collecting glass buttons and then finding uses for them in my sewing. They just really elevate a project, and something about, I think because you touch the button every time you put it on, that just makes it feel special putting it on.
Oh, I love that.
I think that's something that really speaks to me. What about you? Have any special favorites?
I also am a big fan of a pin tuck. I feel like there's so many creative options.
Yeah.
And I've gone down plenty in the process of designing the bloom blouse, which I was talking about earlier. It has the lace insertion. And then right below the yoke, there's also some pin tucks. And when I was in the design process of that, I went down a real rabbit hole of pin tucks. And there's so many creative applications where you can do, of course, linear. You could do radiating pin tucks.
Mm-hmm.
You can do pin tucks that are kind of crosshatched to create almost a plaid or checked type effect. There's so many options. And also they're not very hard.
Yeah. We show them in the YouTube video. We show some of those variations you just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And they're really easy to do. They're surprisingly easy to do.
Especially if you have an edge stitch foot.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it even easier.
Yeah, or a pin tuck foot. So in the video, we go over how to do it with or without a pin tuck foot. So whether you have one or not,
Mm-hmm.
you can do them, and they're really not that hard.
Ooh, sounds like Pintuck's standout star for Seymour.
All right. So the final tip we have is to make it meaningful. I think the most special details are the ones that really hold personal meaning for you. So consider adding elements that tell a story, maybe embroidery that represents something important to you, or fabric from a meaningful source, or a technique that connects to your heritage in some way. You could even add a hidden message or a date that's stitched inside of your garment, which I think is really cool. So my smock madu that I'm making, I was really inspired by blouses that my grandmother wore. It's just a connection to my own history, and it makes the garment feel really precious to me. And I think those meaningful touches create garments that feel like they're part of your story and not just something that you made. What's a meaningful detail that you've added to a project, Haley?
When along the lines of like more heirloom type things, I made a quilt for Charlie when she was a baby. And along on the binding, I embroidered the quote, "Joy is not made to be a crumb." It's from a Mary Oliver poem. And I like it. It's very sentimental to me. And when she was like littler than she is now, we would read books at night. She would sit on my lap in a chair and I'd put that blanket over us and she would always like run her little fingers along the embroidery.
That's sweet.
And, it has, at this point, no meaning to her. But it always struck me that even though it has like the words have no sentimental meaning to her at this point, that I wonder if she'll have that memory, that tactile memory of sitting underneath a quilt with her mom, fiddling with the hand embroidery along the binding. And it just makes it extra special.
Oh, that's so sweet. I love that. Quilts are such a precious heirloom, too. I love it. Well, we have covered a lot today about adding special details to your garments. We talked about finding inspiration, researching techniques, gathering supplies, and making samples. We talked about the importance of embracing imperfection, giving yourself time, and balancing complex projects with simpler ones. And then we shared lots of ideas for details you can try, from embroidery to unique closures to meaningful personal touches. So, what's your big takeaway from today's episode, Haley?
I think my big takeaway, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, is the value of creating things that are meant to be not just direct replica. I think lots of times we can get caught up in this recreating things from ready to wear or duping something. And I think that that's like kind of seeped into the culture of home sewing a lot more. And there's like nothing wrong with that. I love doing that on occasion, but I've been intentionally trying to make more time to create things that my children might want to keep someday. And, they're not going to care about keeping, I don't think, an elastic pair of like elastic waist pair of linen pants. I love making things like that, but that's not what they're going to care about. They're going to care about the things that include details like these that have the imprint of our thoughts and our hands on them. So not all of your projects need to be this way, but taking the time once a year, a couple times a year to make something that's more sentimental or meaningful. I don't know. I just think that's really special and meditative.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think I've been thinking a lot about infusing that quality of specialness in the clothing I have and just becoming a lot pickier about what I let into my life, whether that's objects I let into my life or, how I spend my time, everything as I get older and feel like I have less and less time because time seems to be speeding up every single day. So I've been thinking a lot about that. And I was reading a bit about the slow food movement recently and thinking about how that can be applied to different parts of your life. And it's just made me think that I think our culture right now is very much, it's not just fast, but it's very junky. It's just very junky and superficial in some ways. And it's like junk food for the brain, for, our environments, for our clothing. Everything is kind of this sea of stuff that doesn't really mean that much to us. And so I think the more you can rebel against that and resist that by creating with your hands, by really being picky, like I said, and just like thinking about what you let into your life, I think the more you can create your own culture that is a little island of refuge from all of that dross. So that's what this made me think about today. And again, I like fast projects too. Like I mentioned, I like to vary them and do something that's a little bit quicker because it's satisfying to do that and to make with your hands just for the sake of making something nice with your hands. But it's meaningful to spend the time to do something that feels really special to you. And speaking of special details, I wanted to mention that we've just released 2 new patterns this week that are really perfect canvases for adding your own special touches. So if you want to check those out, I'll tell you a little bit about them. The first is Lilac, which is a slim cut midi dress with an elegant loop button closure. I love loop buttons. I just think they're so pretty. It features a deep V neckline, short sleeves with subtle gathers at the cap, and an underbust seam with bust gathers. And the princess seams and button closures that stop above the knee create a really elegant silhouette that would be perfect for adding special details like embroidery along the neckline or custom covered buttons, which I think custom covered buttons with the loops they're so pretty. And then we've also released Mora, a woven fit and flare dress with a gathered skirt and spaghetti straps. So it has a fitted unlined bodice with an upper bust panel and princess seams that intersect at the bust points. And the gathered skirt and adjustable straps make it super versatile. And those straps would be perfect for adding a little embroidery or even replacing with ribbon for a special touch. So both patterns are available now for Seamwork members. And if you're not a member yet, head to seamwork.com to learn more about joining our community of creative sewists. And if you like this episode, please consider leaving us a review. We read every review and we love to hear from you guys. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. Follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to become part of the Seamwork community, just head over to seamwork.com to learn how to join. And that's it for us this week. I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio.
Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.